Happy March, everybody, and welcome to Hall the Sports Season 2, Episode 1. We are flipping a new leaf, turning a new page, whatever you'd like to call it, here on the show. Rich Behan, Matt Majinski. We do have a special guest today. I'll let him introduce himself in just a minute. But Matt, hello, welcome to a new audience, by the way. You've been listening to us on SoundCloud for a whole season, a whole 16 episodes. So now we flip on to Season 2, Episode 1. You might be watching us now on YouTube. So we are trying to grow and expand the page and expand the podcast as well. So happy to do this, and we'll see how far it goes.
Yeah, and we will. And I think it's going to be a way that we can be more connected and more engaged with the audience. And hopefully we'll get out more engaging content and some special guests as Season 2 moves forward.
And maybe, just maybe, Matt Majinski will find the passwords to our social media accounts. So then we can start posting more, because I have no control over what we post on social media.
Yeah, that'll be the next step in the long list of tasks that's growing daily.
Have you tried password, Matt?
I have not tried password yet.
Knowing you, that could be a good guess.
So if anybody has any guesses to passwords that it could possibly be, just throw it in the comments or whatever, and we'll try it. And if it works, thank you. And then we'll obviously have to change it. But thank you for your help. So we will move on here. This first episode in Season 2, we're going to talk about, we really have not done a Seton Hall episode in a while, so that's where we will focus today. Since it is March, the beginning of March, a lot of basketball is going to be played in this next month. I know Matt this is like the peak of his life every year. Just March is where it's at. Seton Hall this year is going to be, we're going to talk about Seton Hall in this episode. Of course, we're going to talk about UConn as well. And that is where our special guest comes in. So I will let him introduce himself and we will get going.
Yeah. My name is Isaac. I graduated from UConn in 2020 and pretty big UConn basketball fan. And looking forward to previewing the Seton Hall UConn game on Wednesday. Going to be a big game, and looking forward to talking about that.
All right, so we will start. We're gonna go forward here, and we'll start with Seton Hall. Not a good week last week. Let's just call it what it is. It's a week that could end a season if it wasn't this season, because there's so many moving parts in a year like this. Last week, you go to Georgetown and you lose 81-75. And then a few days later, you go to Butler and you lose 61-52. I want to start with that Georgetown game, though, because that to me was the lesser of the two losses. Because while I was watching this Georgetown game, I said, all right, a couple calls went against Seton Hall's way. Georgetown shot the ball extremely well. They were 50% from the floor. They were 62% from beyond the arc. So that was a game where I said, okay, maybe it's just a fluke from Georgetown. If you're Seton Hall, you're allowed to have one of these games every once in a while. You have guys like Jamarco Pickett going off for 20 points. So I looked at that game and I said, all right, if there was one time that in this season you could have had one really bad loss, this isn't the time for it. But that Georgetown game, there were so many things going against Seton Hall that at the end of the day, they really couldn't win the game.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to start with the fact that Georgetown gets a little bit – they don't get enough love as maybe they should. And I say that they're not an NCAA tournament team, but they had one of the tougher non-conference schedules in the Big East, and they did pretty well with it. They beat a UMBC team who's a 2 seed in the America East. They hung in there with West Virginia, who right now is arguably one of the best teams in the country, and especially in the Big 12. They lost 7 to Navy. Navy's only lost 2 games all season. They're 15-2. I know that's a mid-major team, but it's a Georgetown team that's played a great team in West Virginia and a whole lot of good teams in the mid-major ranks. And then in the Big East, they've got a win over Creighton. They have wins over Providence and Marquette. Like, it's not like this team – lost to Marquette by 4, but a win over St. John's. It's not like this team hasn't had wins over some of the better teams in the Big East. I think for Seton Hall fans and Pirate Nation, it was just kind of the fact that Seton Hall handled Georgetown in that first game at the Prudential Center. Seemed like the Pirates were kind of getting things going. So it felt like a game where, okay, it's an away game, but Seton Hall should be able to win this game. Didn't really go that way. It was a real rough and tough game, which is the way that Georgetown likes to play. And obviously being in the small gym, not Georgetown's usual home court, probably paid a little bit of advantage for the Hoyas in that one. And Seton Hall really just couldn't put together enough possessions in a row to be able to flip the script.
The interesting thing to me in this game was, like I said, there were a lot of things going against Seton Hall, but interestingly enough, Seton Hall outscored Georgetown in the paint 40-24, and they also forced 17 turnovers. So there were some positives to take away from the game. It was just that defensively, it was a bit of a breakdown. And I mean, you're allowing Georgetown to shoot 50% from the floor and 62% from behind the arc. It's a little concerning. So while you're doing some things good on defense, forcing turnovers, you're still letting up a decent amount of quality shots as to where you let the other team shoot 50%. And I mean, Georgetown scored 81 points. Yeah. So that's also, you can't really let Georgetown score 81 points, especially this late in the season.
Yeah, and, it also goes to the fact that Georgetown was able to get some shots from the line. They had 5 more free throws, but also Seton Hall's called for 8 more fouls. I try not to get into that too much, but when it's a disparity that's kind of close to 10, there's at least some cause for concern. Now, again, Tyrese Samuel had 5 of those, and he fouls a lot, so there's that. I mean, it wasn't like the refs were the main reason for this one. But Georgetown just played a great game. I mean, they shot 10 of 16 from behind the arc. That's one of the best games Georgetown has had all season from three-point land. And Seton Hall at 6 of 21, while that isn't awful, it's certainly not going to keep you in a game. And in a high-scoring game, that's not going to work.
We move on to the Butler game. This one was the one that concerned me a bit. Because if you watch this game, it was as if you took Seton Hall and you put them in the gauntlet. It really wasn't even that good of a game for Seton Hall. I mean, Jared Rhoden led all scorers with 14 points. I mean, they only scored 52. It was a struggle to put points on the board here. Jared was really the only one that did anything offensively. He finished 6 of 14 from the floor, and he had 4 rebounds. That was by far the best stat line of the game for the Pirates. And really, this game, Seton Hall took it into halftime, leading 26-24. And then they came out of the half shooting 2 of 11 from the field. And that's where it really started to turn. Butler turned their run from 10-1. It eventually turned into 20-6. And really the game just got away from Seton Hall after that. Again, concerning was the fact that they only shot 30, I'll give them 38% from the field. They only shot 22% from beyond 3-point range. That was something that just sticks out to me, because what they did was they kept throwing up 3-point shots. And in a game where you weren't shooting them very well, I don't know what the thought process was there.
To me, it was also Sandro Mamukelashvili getting way too frustrated. This has been a problem all season. He's not a guy that's going to get a lot of technicals, but he is a guy that he got in early foul trouble and he let that get to him. 4 of 13 from the field isn't necessarily terrible. For your best player, sure, should be a little bit better, but I've seen worse. 3 rebounds. They totally kept Mamu off the glass. 1 assist to 6 turnovers. He wasn't able to get other teammates involved. He tried to do too much. That's why the turnovers got in there. But for Butler, not having Aaron Thompson, one of your better scorers, and still being able to win this game, get down on the defensive end, and shut down a Seton Hall team that, while they aren't totally offensively talented like a Creighton or a Villanova, they certainly aren't a team that can't score the ball. I mean, they've scored their fair share of games over 70, 75 points on the season. And Butler just totally took away any type of offensive game that the Pirates had coming into this. And it really was just a shot to the gut, because Seton Hall came in here. It seemed like it was a win that they were 99% going to have. Didn't get it. And now holding on for dear life.
So Seton Hall going into the Georgetown game had the longest win streak in the Big East. It was at 4. That got snapped. Seton Hall also had a 3-game winning streak over Butler before they lost. That got snapped. So now another one that got snapped was in its last 19 tries, Seton Hall, when holding their Big East opponent under 70 points, won the game. So now that's used to be something you could hang your hat on defensively. But now that goes by the wayside as well. There's a lot of little tiny records that keep falling off the board here and things that Seton Hall should have been proud of. So now you have to regroup with 2 games left in the season. We'll talk about UConn in a second, and then you finish the season on the road at St. John's, who they're also fighting on the bubble as well. So you've really put yourself in a tough position here if you're Seton Hall. But in reality, it's nothing new, because the Pirates have seemed to put themselves in these positions year in and year out. Last year, it was because they were winning. This year, it's because they're losing late in the season. In terms of regrouping, where does Seton Hall sit now?
In terms of regrouping, you've just got to find some type of stability, and I think that's hard at this point in the season. And I mentioned this throughout the year, and I'm going to put it on Bryce Aiken, and not putting it on him as if it's his fault, but putting it on the fact that Bryce Aiken came into the season, Seton Hall expecting him to be perhaps either the first or second leading scorer because of what he did at Harvard, averaging over 20 a game there. Injury prone, they figured, okay, maybe he'll be fine. Aiken's been injury prone all season long, and the big thing that I've harped on is the fact that if he's going to be injury prone and Seton Hall is going to try to get him in this lineup and make him more than just a role player, which they kind of did as the season went on, when he gets injured again, all of a sudden you've got to totally revamp the way that your roster is run. And it seems like that's where it's at right now. Jahari Long wasn't getting playing time. Now he is. Where does he stand? Shavar Reynolds was playing almost 40 minutes a game at the beginning of the season. All of a sudden now Aiken comes in. Reynolds doesn't have to do as much. Now he's being counted on highly again. That's tough for him. It's a guy who's a former walk-on. I know he's been a scholarship player for a couple of years, but it's still an adjustment when you didn't get recruited to that role. And as far as some of the other guys, it's about, when are you going to show that you can take over a game? Jared Roden, you are a junior at the end of your junior season. Sandro, you're a senior who supposedly is on the Karl Malone top 5 watch list, supposedly, because I don't really know if he's playing like he should be there right now at all. And they've got to buckle down, because the way that they're playing, this team doesn't deserve to be in the NCAA tournament.
Well, now you flip to a team that they will face Wednesday night, and we won't preview the game just yet. I want to talk a little bit about UConn and how they've gotten to where they are. So that's where we bring Isaac into the conversation. So now UConn on a 2-game winning streak. They go to Georgetown, they win. And then they go home and they face Marquette, and they win pretty handily, 80-62, coming off 2 really good back-to-back wins. From your perspective, Isaac, UConn sitting pretty right now, sitting in a good position here towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if sitting pretty is the word I use. I mean, we're still certainly on the bubble, definitely more comfortable than we were after that Villanova loss a couple weeks ago, and then obviously that bad Providence loss a few weeks back. But the way I'm looking at it right now is, I think UConn's last 60 minutes of basketball, the second half of the Georgetown game and both halves of the Marquette game, that's the best UConn's looked all season. Obviously, UConn early on was looking good. Then Book Night went down for 8 games, which really hurt us in the long term. We were able to go 4-4 in those games, but the losses to Providence and St. John's weren't very good. And those 8 games pretty much took us from looking comfortably in the tournament to pretty much on the edge of the bubble. And then Book Night came back, and first couple games, he's a little bit rusty. But I think what we've seen, especially in the second half of the Georgetown game and the entire Marquette game, is Book Knight's getting his feet back under him. He went for 20 in the Georgetown game with 10 rebounds, 24 points in the Marquette game. And just having Book Knight back out on the floor just opens up the whole offense. Like, even if Book Knight himself isn't having a great shooting day, or he's, having trouble getting to the glass and he's settling for some, mid-range jumpers, even if he's not having a great game, he opens up the floor for everybody else, and especially RJ Cole, who is coming off of his 2 best games of the season. In the Georgetown game, he had filled up the stat sheet, 17 points, 6 steals, 7 assists, 5 rebounds, no turnovers. And then he came out with 21 points in the Marquette game. So if UConn's got James Bouknight and RJ Cole, if they've got a little double-headed monster at guard, I think they're going to be a dangerous team in March. And really what I'm getting from people is like, you don't want to see UConn as like a 10 seed in your area of the bracket right now, because with Bouknight on the court, UConn is a much different team with UConn than they are with him off the court. And to be honest, if he didn't miss 8 games in the middle of the season, we wouldn't be talking about UConn as a bubble team right now. We'd be talking about them as far and away one of the, top 3 teams in the Big East. I don't know if they'd be in the same breath as Nova, but I think we'd be talking about them side by side with Creighton, because we got to remember, looking back to early in the season, UConn fought up and they were ranked before Bouknight got hurt. And I think if Bouknight didn't get hurt, there's no way they go 4-4 in those 8 games. I think they still lose to Creighton, but I think they might go 7-1 in those games. And we're just looking at a completely different story for this UConn team. So I don't know if I can't say we're guaranteed a tournament spot right now, but we certainly control our own fate. And I think if UConn wins at least, they have 3 more games guaranteed. They got Seton Hall, and then they got another Georgetown game. And then obviously at least 1 game in the Big East tournament. If they win 2 of those 3 games, I think we can say they're in. But honestly, I'm feeling pretty good about where UConn's at right now, especially with Bouknight back and on the mend and making everybody around him better.
You talk about the impact of Bouknight and Cole as well. I think if you don't watch UConn, those 2 guys. But if you watch your own team and then maybe you play UConn once or twice a year, you'll know about Bouknight, you'll know about Cole. What are some of the X factors for a UConn team that really, because I would consider Bouknight and Cole undersized guards.
Sure.
So where does UConn get that size from, maybe down low, or who are the other main components of this team?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say a couple of big parts of this team, and maybe a player people haven't heard a lot of, a freshman for us, Andre Jackson. And he's not a great 3-point shooter. You don't really want to see him step behind the arc and take a 3, but inside he's strong in the paint, and might be honestly our strongest defender as a freshman. Like you'll see him locking up the opposing team's best player frequently. Like he is in your face on defense, but he plays smart. He's a smart, especially for a freshman, to see someone able to play as tight defense as he is and, limit the fouls. It's huge. Like he changes the look of UConn on defense when he's on the floor. And honestly, I think he's one of the biggest reasons why in our last 4 games, I think, in our last 4 games, we held opponents to under 70 points, and 3 of those 4 under 62. And with him on the floor on the defensive glass and just locking down the opponent's big, it's a game changer. And then you've also got Isaiah Whaley, who I think is a really good bit player for this team. He can do a bit of everything. He can shoot a mid-range jump shot. He can, drive in for a layup. And again, he's a guy that can lock you down on defense and really play with that intensity that keeps the game flowing. And I think Whaley and Jackson are 2 huge components of this team down low.
Matt, I'm always curious on your thoughts on a UConn team. Do you agree with Isaac? Do you disagree? And really, where in your opinion, where is UConn at right now?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I think there's 2 things. One thing that stands out is when UConn generally does well, and even when they don't do well, they have a good guard. And I think we can all agree that James Bouknight is at least a pretty good guard.
At least pretty good.
RJ Cole, to me, is inconsistent at times. I know that he can put up points and he'll find at least 10 points a game, but definitely is a guy that sometimes I think shoots a little bit too much where other guys can be involved. I think Tyrese Martin is a guy that should be getting more shots than he is. He's the leading rebounder on this team as a guard, and I understand he's a pretty good sized guard, but Tyrese Martin's a very good player. The thing that's impressed me right now about Connecticut is the fact that there are players on this team that Dan Hurley recruited, but there are still players on this team that Kevin Ollie had a part in recruiting. And it's not just 1 or 2 of them. And you've got a couple guys on this team that Kevin Ollie helped recruit. And Dan Hurley has completely flipped the script and been able to turn around what they think about playing for UConn basketball means and building them into a system, and not only getting them to stay with the team, because a lot of times if you're recruited by a coach, you want to go and play somewhere else, but they've bought into a system, and it's clear to see that. And it's kind of amazing that he's been able to do that. What I will say about this Connecticut team is the rebounding. And I know I just mentioned how a guard leads this team in rebounding. Whaley can rebound, Sanogo can come in and rebound, but they don't really have that big-time center. And a lot of years, UConn will have a center. Hashim Thabit is obviously one that comes to mind. They've had other guys in the past that I'm just blanking on right now, but they don't really have that big man that can anchor them. I know a Cook is a guy that they'd hope they'd have for the season, but injury struggles have really hurt them there.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. I mean, a Cook's been back a little bit, but I think in the Xavier game, he played 10 minutes. He looked really good, scored 7 points, was shooting the ball well. But I just think he's still not back. He's definitely not back to 100%. He's not really in game shape yet. They're getting him in there for a few minutes a game. And hopefully maybe he can be back in the 5 to 10 minute range come March, but it's going to be tough to count on a Cook. But Matt, as far as rebounding goes, I mean, I get what you're saying, but in all honesty, UConn has been a great rebounding team this year. The last 4 games, at least, when I'm looking back, they've out rebounded their opposing team. Against Providence, they out rebounded Providence by 10. They had 16 offensive rebounds. Against Nova, they were about even with Nova in rebounds. Georgetown, they were 46 rebounds to 30. Marquette, they came out with, again, about even to Marquette. But even without that big center that's grabbing boards, UConn really is an aggressive team on the glass and can hang in there and pretty much be even on the boards, or oftentimes they can be out-rebounding their team even without that big center. And obviously that would help if a Cook was in game shape and could be out there getting boards too. But this team's really aggressive out there on the glass, and it shows. And it's maybe not a strength of the team, but I also don't think it's necessarily a weakness.
And Isaac, I guess what I'll say to counter that is that while it might not be a weakness, if you consider UConn, I think I'd consider this team right now, definitely they're a little bit scrappy. They're not a Villanova that comes in there and it's Villanova basketball. UConn's a little bit scrappy, and I think that's partially because they've got all these moving pieces on Hurley's recruits and Ali's recruits. The problem for UConn and why we're previewing this game is that if you're looking at the other scrappy teams in the Big East, Seton Hall and Georgetown come to mind. So when I look at the Seton Hall upcoming, that scrappy type of basketball isn't necessarily going to take the forefront because it's 2 scrappy teams going head to head. So I just look at that as kind of a way to where it evens up for both sides.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely a fair point. But in the end, having watched this team this year, they just they really have a nose for the rebounds. Like a loose ball, in obviously Seton Hall is the same way. It's going to be an interesting to watch on Wednesday. Just these contested rebounds and which way they're going, and the loose balls on the floor. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of bodies on the floor.
All right. Well, we talked about how we got here. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about Seton Hall, UConn on Wednesday night. We will also talk about the newly released Big East tournament bracket and the changes made to it with an extra team in the league this year. So don't go anywhere. You are either listening to Hall the Sports on SoundCloud or you are watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. Back now on Hall the Sports. We talked about, I teased it a little bit before the break. We'll talk about Seton Hall UConn first, and then we'll get into the tournament bracket because one thing comes before the next. So we will start with Seton Hall UConn. That is going to be, of course, on Wednesday night, March 3rd. It's going to be at 6:30. If you're watching locally, it's going to be on FS1. Of course, if you were able to get tickets for the game, Matt and I will be there. So 1, come stop and say hi if you see us. And 2, it will be senior night. So make sure you get there early, and get to your seats as well. It was really, I think, a good job by not only Governor Phil Murphy. I mean, obviously I don't think he did this with this thought in mind, but it just worked out as to where, Seton Hall didn't have any fans in attendance for the whole year. But it's nice to get fans back in the building, especially just in time for senior night. especially when you have when you have a guy like Sandro Mamukelashvili, who has really come on here and taken the mantle of being the top guy in the program. And I know, Matt, you had a little bit of harsh words to say for him in the first half of the show, but he is top 5 in the Karl Malone Award watch list, and he has done really tremendous things for this program. So for him to be able to celebrate his senior night should be really special in front of fans.
Yeah, and I know I was a little bit hard on him, and that's because I feel like I deserve to be, and he deserves to get it. I mean, he's a great player. I mean, he's an 1,000-point scorer. He hit that buzzer beater last year that was huge for Seton Hall, and time again he's come up clutch. It's just that when you become the star of a team, and when you're in the New York area, you've got to be able to take it. And I'm sure UConn fans are the same way, being in that same geographical location. When you're the star player, the fans are coming at you, and if you're not going to pull your weight for a couple games, you're going to hear it. And I think that Mamu has the thick enough skin to take it. And I'm also expecting some big things from him as he gets a good week off of well-deserved rest and comes in with 2 big games against Connecticut and then St. John's.
So Seton Hall currently sitting at 13-10, UConn at 12-6. Everybody really knows the implications of this game. Whoever wins is really going to be set up nicely for a tournament bid, and whoever loses is really going to have to help, is going to have to be helped by other teams, is what I was trying to say. So as we sit here today, the implications of this game, of course, are huge. I'll start with you, Matt. If you're Seton Hall, if you're looking at this game, you're coming off of 2 losses in games that really you should not have lost and you really needed to win. Both of these teams kind of on the bubble or either last 4 in, depending on what bracket you look at. If you're Seton Hall, you regroup and now you look at yourself in the mirror and say, we have 2 opportunities here at the end of the season. They need to be wins. And then we need to get to the Big East tournament and do whatever. Your message, if you were Kevin Willard, your message to the team is what?
Your message to the team is simply, look, we've made it this far in the season. There was no tournament last year. You guys know the stakes. And if you don't know the stakes, then you did it to yourselves. You simply don't deserve to be in the tournament. I think it's as simple as that. There's a couple of roadmaps you could look at. You always try to be like, well, what if we win this one, lose the other? What if we lose both of these? Well, if they lose both, they got to win the Big East tournament. If they split them, then they've probably got to at least make the Big East championship. Maybe even then they need to win the Big East tournament. But I think the sheer thing that's carrying Seton Hall right now is that no matter how this final part of the season turns out, I really don't see any situation where they could be worse than the 4th best team in the Big East as far as seeding goes. That's got to carry some weight. Not having a win over Villanova and Creighton certainly isn't helping. So right now, got to win these 2 and win 1 game in the Big East tournament if you want to feel safe, as if, okay, we're going to be in the tournament, and if we're not, we have some complaining to do. Even if you just win these 2, and if you got knocked out in the first round in like a close game, I think even then you're going to at least be on the bubble and you'll still be being thrown around in the tournament or not. But you got to take it game by game. That's the age-old saying, and it starts on Wednesday.
Isaac, will flip to UConn, and I kind of really have the same question for you. UConn is at least coming off of 2 wins and not 2 losses. You talked about how really if they didn't lose book night, maybe we wouldn't even be having this conversation of, is this game as important to UConn? But nonetheless, we are here. So if you're Danny Hurley, you walk into the locker room and you say, hey, listen, we've overcome adversity. It's going to be no different here towards the end of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Book Night said it best about a week ago, and when he said right now it's kill or be killed for UConn, and it's tough because I don't think this game against Seton Hall is necessarily it's huge for both teams, but I think it's a bit more important for Seton Hall, especially with it being a home game for them. I think UConn can afford a loss to Seton Hall as long as they beat Marquette and win a game or 2 in the tournament. But the thing is, you're really never sure how much the committee weighs. Like, oh, they were missing their NBA lottery pick, one of the best players in the country, for 8 games. You're really not sure how much the committee weighs that. So I think really, if UConn wants to feel safe, they got to beat Seton Hall. They then got to go beat Georgetown, and then you want to win at least 1 in the tournament. So I think right now it's kill or be killed, keep that mentality that you need to keep winning, because once you let up on the brakes and think, oh, maybe we've done enough now to make the tournament, that's when you get into some trouble. So I think UConn, I think maybe it's not as important, as big of a game for them as Seton Hall, but I think you got to keep that mindset that it is, that this game is your season. And I think you can expect them to come out playing like it is.
Let's talk about a couple keys for this game coming up on Wednesday. Isaac, I'll start with you this time. For UConn, you talked about, of course, Bouknight and Cole getting theirs on offense. They've both put up 20-plus point games.
Sure.
If you look at this UConn team right now, what are you looking at as X factors or key factors heading into this game against Seton?
Yeah, I think honestly one of the biggest things to watch in this game, and someone who I honestly forgot to mention earlier, is Adama Sanogo down in the post. He's pretty much our big man right now, and I think him and Mamu, that's going to be something to watch, because obviously Mamu is one of the top big men in the country, and maybe he's been having some rough games lately, but he's a senior with a lot of talent and a lot of minutes under his belt and experience playing in big games and experience playing this part of the season. Whereas Sanogo, he's a freshman for us, and he's had some really solid games. He's looked good for a freshman. He's had some silly freshman moments with dumb fouls and stuff like that, but by and large, he's been a big part of this game. So I think UConn needs to early on try to get him the ball and see how he's working against Mamu and see how that matchup's going and kind of establish, okay, is this working for us or do we have to go somewhere else? But I think if you can kind of make Seton Hall think about Sanogo in the post and consider him and have him in the back of their mind as someone who can score points down low for them against Mamu, I think that's going to open up the rest of the floor for Bouknight and Cole and Martin and Gaffney and Jackson. So I really think establishing that post with Sanogo and a little bit with Whaley, I think that's going to be a huge part of this game. UConn can't ignore that. UConn's got to get Sanogo the ball. They got to be testing Mamu, and they have to use that to open up the rest of the floor.
Matt, I'll go to you next, but before I do, I want to say just personally, I think a key for Seton Hall in this game is going to be Ike Obiagu because of Adama Sanogo. I think that's going to be a good matchup down low. I'm not going to lean on Ike, and I'm not going to look towards Ike to give me a lot of offensive output. But what I will look at Ike for is defense. And he's going to have to stand in there and stand in tall against Sanogo. UConn is going to be a team that's going to really perimeter scoring or scoring from their guards is really going to carry them. So an added element for Seton Hall is going to be not letting them get those extra points inside. We talk about Seton Hall's inability to really defend the three and defend guards really well. So you're going to know that those guards from UConn are going to get theirs offensively. What you can't allow is to compound the problem by letting anybody get their points inside. So for me, that's a huge key for the game, but I'll turn it over to Matt now for the Seton Hall side. Keys to the game, X factors, and, maybe players to watch.
I'm going to turn it over to Miles Cale. This is potentially his biggest game of the season. James Bouknight wasn't there for the first matchup between these two. Shavar Reynolds will most likely guard RJ Cole, which in my mind shifts Miles Cale to James Bouknight. And while Cale is a good defender, he's a solid defender, it's definitely a guy that I would like to have on Bouknight. He's probably the most athletic guy on Seton Hall, so he's someone that could at least stay with Bouknight enough. But if James Bouknight scores 25 points in this game, UConn's most likely winning this game. Cale's either going to have to keep him below that number or make him earn his 25 on a field goal percentage that isn't great. If Miles Cale doesn't come out and defend, this game could be over because Shavar Reynolds has not been playing great. So Seton Hall needs someone at the guard position to stand up. And because this team doesn't really have another point guard, again, Jahari Long's still learning the game, you shift to a shooting guard, and Miles Cale's got to be that guy. He's going to have to score points as well. This game isn't going to be a 60-point first to 60 wins. I mean, this game is most likely going to at least get into the 70s.
And who knows? Of course, with Kevin Willard playing the will he play, won't he play game that he always plays with the media, Bryce Aiken might be back for this game. He might not be. Really, when it comes to Kevin Willard and announcing injuries, it will be a game time decision. Yeah. So for Seton Hall's sake, this really isn't a game where you want to see Jahari Long. And I don't mean that in a way as to where I don't think Jahari Long is a good player. I think he can get there eventually. But you're now getting into the late end of the season in games where, you really should win. You have to win. you can't really afford to see Jahari Long in these type of games. And not like Bryce Aiken's going to give you a lot of defense off the bench, but he is, again, another all-star caliber guard, as to where, you mentioned Shavar really has not been playing well as of late. We tout him as a defensive guru and a defensive specialist who can knock down a 3-point shot. While his offense really hasn't suffered, his defense has, and he's been committing a lot of fouls. So when he's had to come off the court, it's left Seton Hall in a very precarious position as to where Jahari Long has had to play meaningful minutes. And for a team like Seton Hall, that can't be. So getting Bryce Aiken back, if he does come back and play, would be a huge lift for this Pirates team.
Yeah, it's one of the first Seton Hall teams that I can remember where they didn't really have a shooting guard that they could kind of bring in there and play point guard, because Miles Cale at 6'6" has kind of always been a shooting guard, small forward role. So to learn the point guard role in one season would be virtually impossible for him. They got, obviously Mamu can bring the ball up. Roden can bring the ball up. Like, they got, it's not like they can't dribble, but playing the point guard role is something totally different. Kadeem Carrington and Miles Power were able to learn that role because they were shooting guards that already had point guard instincts. This Seton Hall team doesn't really have that. So for Bryce Aiken to be out at this point in the season kind of hurts this team.
Well, we will see on Wednesday night. It's like I said, going to be a really good game. 6:30 Wednesday night on FS1 if you're watching on television.
I got something else, Rich.
Isaac has a point. Yeah,
I got a couple other things for UConn. Matt was mentioning how he thinks this game will probably be up in the 70s, and I think a big key to UConn here is you have to keep Seton Hall under 70 points. Because if you go back and look through UConn's season, like even when Bouknight's been out, their biggest strength this year has been their defense. And the fact is UConn's lost 6 games, and all 6 of their losses, besides the Villanova game, they've let up at least 70 points from the opposition. The Villanova game, they let up 68. And then all of their wins, except for the Xavier win and their win against Central Connecticut, the first game of the season, they've held the opposing team to under 70 points. So, and I think that's really huge for UConn, is to keep Seton Hall under 70 points, and really make sure their defense is coming out strong. And then also, they're going to want Tyler Polley shooting the 3-ball well, because UConn really isn't a great 3-point shooting team, and Polley is by far their best 3-point shooter. So if Tyler Polley can come out and score 10+ points and UConn keep Seton Hall under 70, I think UConn's got to be feeling pretty good about their chances to win this game.
Yeah, that 70-point mark should really be the nail on the head for both teams.
Yeah.
Because, as I mentioned before, Seton Hall was 19-0 before the game against Butler, with holding their team opponents under 70 points. And, of course, that'll be a key for UConn as well. So, really, maybe a defensive game, or hopefully a defensive game for both teams, a big battle, as they say. We'll circle back to that game when we say our goodbyes at the end. We just wanted to quickly talk about this Big East tournament bracket, and we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. But it was just recently released, and it is new for this year, obviously, with the addition of an 11th team to the conference. The old schedule would be you'd have 2 games on Wednesday. Those would be the last 2 teams in the conference, and then you'd have the 4-game Thursday, the semifinals on Friday, and then the final on Saturday at 6:30. Not much of it has changed structured wise. It is just the fact that now on Wednesday we have 3 games. Right now, Seton Hall and UConn won't find themselves anywhere near Wednesday. No. And it probably will be just that problem at the end of the season. They won't be anywhere near that Wednesday, but on Thursday it will get a little complicated for them. But on Wednesday, the Big East has added a game at 3:00. It's the 8-9 game at 3:00. And the winner of that will go on to face the number 1 seed in the first game on Thursday. And then on Wednesday at 6:00 and 9:00, those times stay the same. 6:00 is the 7-10 game, and at 9:00 is the 6-11 game. Right now, UConn and Seton Hall really in that 3-4 mix. So really, the games you're going to have to look at for both Seton Hall and UConn are going to be on Thursday at 3:00. That's going to be the 4-5 game. And then at 9:00 on Thursday, it's going to be the 3 seed versus whoever wins that 6-11 game. So for Seton Hall, I know we joke about it in the past. Seton Hall has been in that 9:00 game on Thursday in what feels like the past 14 years. So for Seton Hall, really to get out of that 9:00 game, I think would be beneficial. But then you would be put in the top half of the bracket with the number 1 seed, which is either going to be Villanova or Creighton. So Matt, I guess my question to you is, if you're Seton Hall, take out the NCAA tournament implications and you look at the Big East tournament implications, where would you rather be? Would you rather be in that 3 seed playing that 9:00 game yet again? Or would you rather play that matinee game, but if you make it to the semifinals, you'd probably match up with number 1?
I'm actually going to take this from both sides, if I may. And I think that this is going to sound weird. I think for Seton Hall to be the 3 seed and for UConn to be the 4 seed in this tournament would benefit both teams based on who they play. Because Seton Hall already beat St. John's. St. John's would be the 6 seed right now. While I think UConn would crush St. John's and get them back for that loss, they did lose to them. So, I mean, you got to hold that at some weight.
Without book night.
Right. But, you still kind of get the point there.
Sure.
I think the Xavier matchup would be good for both teams, but UConn with the recent away win at Xavier is pretty impressive. They beat them on the road, so I think that'd be a favorable matchup. But then past that, who'd they play in the next round? And I think Seton Hall would much rather have Creighton. I think they'd much rather have a Creighton than a Villanova, because Villanova, that last game at Seton Hall, and Seton Hall's normally each year has one good game against Villanova. This year, I don't think they're built for it. I think UConn is. I think UConn's a team that can speed up Villanova, and I think they could win that game easier than Seton Hall could. That's just the way that I look at it.
I mean, I think both teams in the end are going to want to have that 3 seed, just because if you have the 3 seed, that means you probably won the Wednesday Seton Hall UConn game. Right. But as far as just looking at the Big East tournament, I think both teams would rather be in that 3 seed spot just in the Big East tournament. Just because, I mean, UConn, you look at their 2 games against Creighton this year. Their first one, they were a free throw or 2 from RJ Cole away from winning it, but Cole missed some key free throws at the end of the game. Like, UConn was up 2 with 10 seconds left on the free throw line. Cole missed both free throws. Creighton ran down the court for a layup and then won in overtime. So, like, UConn should have won that game against Creighton. Like, I know woulda, shoulda, coulda, but the fact is they were 2 free throws away from like a 75% free throw shooter from beating Creighton, and he didn't hit him. And then their second game against Creighton came with book night out, and they didn't play great. They lost by 8, but they were sticking in that game for most of it without book night. And then, the Nova game, we lost by 8 with book night in one of his first games back. But I really think UConn should have 1 win against Creighton this year. And then they played him close the second time without their star player. So I think UConn would also rather have that 3 seed spot. And then as far as probably playing St. John's goes, I mean, again, UConn lost to St. John's by 4, had some free throw troubles that game, and they were without book night. So I don't really think UConn particularly cares too much about if they're playing Xavier or St. John's in the first round. And I think both teams would rather have Creighton than Villanova.
All right, I will hand it off to the two of you to say your final thoughts, final whatever on either the game Wednesday or as the season continues here to wind down, maybe a look back on what these teams have done, or maybe a look into the future as what they can accomplish as we get deeper into March. Matt, I will start with you.
Yeah, I don't think there's any sense in me doing a prediction here. You kind of know where I would already lie. I feel like you already know where Isaac would lie on that one. So I will just say that for Seton Hall to win, they've got to make sure that Sandro gets to, I'd say, at least 18 points as a benchmark, and make sure that Jared Rhoden and Miles Cale both reach double figures. I think if those 3 both have at least somewhat of decent games, it always helps out, because those are the 3 players that need to. And sometimes it helps the other guys gain confidence. When your top players on your team are scoring, then the other guys feel that the pressure isn't on them as much. So it might help, a Tyrese Samuel get a bucket or 2 or something in there. And for UConn, it's, to me, James Bouknight having a good game. That's where it goes every single game for UConn. I mean, if he has a good game, which he most likely will, they're going to be in the game. Who's that second guy? Is Cole going to be able to be efficient from the field? Is Gaffney? I know Gaffney had a good game the last time these two played. Who's the second guy going to be, or even the third guy, as far as, whatever impact he's doing, whether it's scoring the ball, because Bouknight can score. So it's not like they need a third guy to score 15 points a game. Is there going to be a guy that's dishing out 5-6 assists that normally only averages 2? I think that's my key for Connecticut.
Sure. And then I would come over and say keys for UConn here is obviously, like you said, like Bouknight's going to get his points. Cole's been our second scorer the last few games. So I think UConn's got to find a third option out there. They don't need someone else to put up, 15 plus points. Like Cole and Bouknight are going to be your big scorers. But again, like I said, I think if you can come out and get 20 to 25 points combined from Sanogo and Poly, I think that's going to be huge for UConn, because if they're scoring at that clip, that means UConn is getting some work done in the paint and the post with Sanogo, and that means Poly's hitting some 3-pointers. And if UConn's scoring a bit from 3, which is oftentimes a struggle for them, and if they're scoring in the paint, that really opens up the rest of the floor, obviously for Bouknight and Cole, but also for guys like Tyrese Martin and Jalen Gaffney, and then maybe Isaiah Whaley for some mid-range shots. So I really think if Sanogo and Poly have solid games and can do their jobs, which is 3-point shooting and snagging some boards and hitting some little jump hooks in the paint, I think if they can come out and do that, I think Seton Hall is going to be hard-pressed to beat UConn, because UConn is a deep team, a very deep team. They're 8 deep, I'd say, right now. And if they can come out and have Sanogo and Poly doing what they need to do, that's really going to make life easier for Cole and Bouknight and the rest of the team.
Well, we are getting down to it. Welcome to March, everybody. This is what we will be doing for the next how many weeks? We'll finish up the regular season, conference tournament time, and then just before you know it, it'll be March Madness big bracket time. So we will talk to you then. Enjoy the game on Wednesday. A big thank you to Isaac for coming on the show today, giving us a UConn perspective. We appreciate that. Seton Hall, UConn Wednesday night. And then, of course, finish out the regular season watching Seton Hall, and then we'll see what happens in the Big East tournament and beyond. All right, for Matt Majinski, I'm Rich Behan saying so long. Thank you for either watching now on YouTube or still listening to us on SoundCloud. A big thank you. We are now going to start season 2, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back for you, season 2, episode 2, coming up shortly.